Muntu, a play written in 1975 by Ghanaian playwright Joe de Graft, is a powerful and ambitious theatrical exploration of the African identity, experience, and history. It traces the journey of the African man, referred to as Muntu, a Bantu word meaning person or human being, from the dawn of civilization through colonial domination to post-independence challenges. The play functions both as a dramatic performance and as a sweeping historical allegory. With elements of epic theater, music, dance, narration, and symbolism, Muntu encapsulates centuries of African struggle, resilience, and aspiration. This dramatized historical pageant is both didactic and poetic, addressing themes of cultural identity, resistance, oppression, and the quest for dignity and justice. Joe de Graft's Muntu stands as an essential African literary work that synthesizes history, myth, and ideology in the service of cultural affirmation and political awareness. Muntu is structured as a historical drama that unfolds in a series of episodic scenes. Each segment presents a different period in African history, showcasing the evolution of the African condition through symbolic characters and poetic narration. Prologue. The beginning. The play opens with the narrator, the guiding voice throughout the performance, introducing Muntu as the embodiment of the African spirit. This figure is not a single character but a representation of African humanity across time. The opening scenes depict a time when Muntu lives in harmony with nature and community, symbolizing a pre-colonial era of cultural richness, autonomy, and spiritual depth. Act 1. Pre-colonial glory. This section portrays African civilization before the arrival of Europeans. The audience witnesses scenes of flourishing empires, kings, artisans, healers, and oral traditions. Muntu is seen as a noble figure, confident and self-sufficient. The dramatization evokes the grandeur of African civilizations like Mali, Ghana, and Great Zimbabwe, countering colonial narratives that framed Africa as primitive and chaotic. Act 2. The coming of the invader. The tone shifts dramatically as European powers arrive. This act dramatizes the slave trade, colonial conquest, and cultural imperialism. Muntu is subjugated, chained, dehumanized, and exploited. Characters such as the slave trader, the colonial administrator, and the missionary appear, symbolizing the forces of economic exploitation, political domination, and religious indoctrination. The colonizer's narrative is presented in contrast to the suffering of Muntu, who becomes fragmented, torn between his heritage and the new colonial structures. De Graft sharply critiques the violent and deceptive nature of colonialism, exposing how it undermined indigenous systems and imposed foreign values. Act 3. The Awakening. This act portrays the rise of anti-colonial consciousness and resistance. Muntu begins to question his oppression and reclaim his identity. Pan-Africanist and nationalist movements emerge, and figures representing leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta, Patrice Lumumba, and others inspire collective awakening. The audience witnesses scenes of protests, political speeches, and the struggle for independence. Muntu is depicted as rediscovering his strength and voice. However, the act also warns of emerging challenges: neocolonialism, internal corruption, and disillusionment. Act 4. Post-independence disillusionment. The final act depicts the period after independence. Although colonial rulers have been ousted, Africa continues to grapple with internal divisions, military coups, poverty, and political instability. Muntu now faces a different kind of enslavement, not by foreign powers, but by his own leaders and societal contradictions. The narrator poses a critical question: what shall Muntu become? This rhetorical inquiry underscores the uncertainty of Africa's future. The play ends on a note that is both hopeful and cautionary. Muntu must redefine himself not just through political freedom but through moral, cultural, and philosophical renewal. Major themes. 1. Historical consciousness and the African past. At its core, Muntu is a dramatization of African history. Joe de Graft emphasizes that understanding one's history is essential to forging identity. The pre-colonial scenes reclaim African agency and refute Eurocentric historiography that portrayed Africa as lacking civilization. De Graft's approach is educational, aimed at enlightening both African and global audiences about the continent's complex and often misrepresented history. The narrative suggests that for Africa to move forward, it must confront, reinterpret, and embrace its past. 2. Colonialism and its legacy. The play is a profound indictment of colonialism. Through powerful visual and symbolic representation, the trauma of slavery, cultural domination, and economic exploitation is made vivid. The scenes involving missionaries and colonial administrators highlight the psychological and spiritual violence inflicted on Muntu, who is coerced into rejecting his heritage in favor of foreign ideologies. Yet, de Graft also critiques the post-colonial elite who, after achieving independence, often mimic colonial patterns of oppression. This dual critique elevates the play from a mere anti-colonial text to a reflective piece on power, ethics, and responsibility. 3. Identity and the self. The struggle of Muntu is the struggle for identity. The play explores how colonialism fractured African selfhood, replacing indigenous languages, religions, and values with alien ones. Muntu's journey is symbolic of the collective need to reconstruct an authentic African self, one that synthesizes tradition and modernity without succumbing to neo-colonial traps. The metaphor of Muntu being torn, fragmented, and finally reassembling himself reflects the psychological and cultural rehabilitation that is necessary for post-colonial healing. 4. Resistance and reclamation. Resistance is a recurring motif. From early passive endurance to organized political struggle, Muntu gradually moves from submission to assertion. Figures of resistance are honored: freedom fighters, artists, teachers, and thinkers, who challenge oppressive systems and reawaken the African spirit. De Graft highlights the importance of intellectual and cultural resistance as much as political defiance. True liberation, the play suggests, comes from within, from a renewed consciousness and ethical commitment to justice. 5. The role of art and theater. Muntu is itself an example of how art can serve as a vehicle for social and political awakening. The play uses song, dance, chants, visual metaphors, and stylized movement to create a collective experience. Theater becomes a space not just for storytelling but for historical meditation and communal catharsis. De Graft envisions drama as both entertainment and enlightenment, a medium that can question, confront, and transform. Characters and symbolism. Muntu is not an individual but a collective, symbolic character representing the African person through time. He is every man and every woman, encompassing the continent's joys, sorrows, defeats, and dreams. His evolution from nobility to slavery, to awakening, and finally to self-questioning embodies the African journey. Narrator. The narrator serves as a guide and chorus, much like in Greek or Brechtian drama. He links the episodes, provides commentary, and raises philosophical questions. The narrator also speaks to the audience directly, breaking the fourth wall to invite reflection and response. Colonial figures: slave trader, missionary, administrator. These characters are archetypes rather than complex individuals. They represent systems, economic greed, religious dogma, and political control that dehumanized and exploited Africa. De Graft uses these figures to expose the hypocrisy and cruelty of colonial ideologies. Freedom fighters and visionaries. Characters inspired by real-life African leaders and revolutionaries are included to celebrate agency and resistance. They provide a counterpoint to colonial narratives and embody hope, resilience, and courage. Stylistic features. Epic structure. The play uses an episodic structure with fluid transitions across centuries and events. It follows the epic theater tradition, encouraging critical distance and reflection. Multimedia techniques, music, drumming, chants, masks, and choreography enrich the theatrical experience. These elements are drawn from African performance traditions, making Muntu an immersive cultural spectacle. Allegory and symbolism. Muntu's journey is allegorical, with each act representing a historical phase. Chains, masks, traditional costumes, and drums serve symbolic functions, conveying deeper meanings about power, memory, and identity. Direct address and didacticism. The play speaks directly to the audience, asking them to think, question, and act. Its didactic purpose is clear. It aims to educate and provoke consciousness. Conclusion. Joe de Graft's Muntu is a landmark work of African drama that encapsulates the continent's history, struggles, and aspirations in a poetic, symbolic, and theatrical form. It moves beyond mere historical narrative to ask essential questions about identity, ethics, and the future of African societies. The play remains a profound meditation on what it means to be African in a world shaped by conquest, resistance, and transformation. Muntu's unfinished journey becomes a call to the audience, to reflect on history, to challenge injustice, and to participate in the ongoing task of liberation and self-realization. Through Muntu, de Graft offers not only a theatrical masterpiece but also a timeless political and philosophical statement that Africa's redemption lies in reclaiming its voice, remembering its roots, and forging a just, humane future.